स्टार्ट करूया. जसं यू नो like ovary is an important organ of the female reproductive system. Ovarian disease can happen at any stage of life, from fetus in utero, like this fetal ovarian cyst, to the lifespan of the existence of the female. There are so many ovarian cysts like dermoid cyst, follicular cyst, chocolate cyst, cancer cyst. We have 7 cases today, 7 case presentation. So without wasting time, I introduce first Anusha Reddy. I request Anusha Reddy to start our first clinical meeting. Anusha Shetty, sorry.
Good evening everyone. Myself Dr. Anusha Shetty, Junior Resident from Dr. BMGMC Solapur. Today I am going to discuss on a case of presentation of benign tumor of ovary, mucinous histoadenoma, treated by Dr. Vidya Thankama. My patient of 44 years old named XY residing in the Pashri, Solapur, belonging to lower middle socio-economic status, came with the complaints of abdominal distension, heaviness in the lower abdomen since 6 months, which was insidious onset and progressive in nature. She also gives a history of early satiety and bloating sensations since 2 months. There is no history of pain in abdomen, no history of frequent urgency or difficulty in micturition, no history of difficulty in defecation. Menstrual history, she attained menarche at 13 years of age and she has a regular cycle with 3 to 4 days cycles lasting for 3 to 4 days, 28 to 30 days cycle, regular moderate flow without any abnormal uterine bleeding, and her last LFT was 16 May 2023. And she married since in 20 years, paraphernalia 5 with all were spontaneous uneventful pregnancies with normal delivery and normal puerperia. And she undergone the postpartum sterilizations done 13 years back, and she doesn't give any history of usage of OC pills or the IUCDs. And there is no history of hypertension, diabetes, mellitus, cardiovascular diseases or any malignancy in her past history, and neither any histories in the family of any breast, ovarian or the endometrial malignancies. And she consumes mixed diet with she complains of the reduced appetite, the disturbed sleeping because of the abdominal mass. Bowel and bladder habits are normal, no addictions or no any substance abuse. On examination, she is conscious, oriented, moderately built and nourished with a BMI of 32 kg per meter square. Pulse rate was 84, beat 140/80. No pallor, icterus, clubbing, cyanosis or the lymphadenopathy is noticed, and the thyroid bilateral breast examinations were normal. Spine and gait were normal. Systemic examinations, CVS was normal, S1, S2 her, no murmur. In the RS examinations, there was normal bilateral breast sounds with no added sounds. CNS examination was normal. On per abdomen examination, on inspection, abdomen is distended, umbilicus central and everted. All quadrants are moved equally with respiration. Pubectomy scar was healthy, but there is no other scar of the sinus related veins. Hernial or spices free. On palpation, no local rise of temperature, no tenderness or cardiac or rigidity. A mass of around 25 to 20 cm, corresponding to the 30 to 32 weeks of the gravid uterus size, occupying the hypogastric and right, left, lumbar and iliac regions, extending above the umbilicus with smooth surface, dense cystic in consistency. All margins are felt except the lower border. Dull note heard over the percussion over the mass on percussion, and no privy heard on auscultation. Local examination, external genital appears normal. On percussion, vagina healthy, cervix healthy, no local lesion or no abnormal discharges. On perimeral examination, uterus not made out separate from the mass. Mass of about 25 to 20 cm felt through the all the fornices. For rectal examination, rectal mucosa free, no nodular defect. With my history and examination findings, I will go with the diagnosis of paraphernalia lymphoid with tuberculosis patient with ovarian mass, mostly probably a benign ovarian tumor. Differential diagnosis: benign ovarian tumor or the malignant ovarian tumor, radial glioma, large glioma. We proceeded with the investigation. The normal routine investigation was done. CBC HB 11.8, the total count was 14,000. The RFT level was normal. X-ray and ECG were within normal. USG findings showed well-defined multi-locate cystic lesion with a dense internal echoes of size 13 to 20 to 70 cm, noted in the pelvic in the middle extending up to epigastric region. The lesion shows multiple daughter cysts within, and right ovary not seen separating from the above lesion. The lesion is seen causing mass effect on the bowel lobes or bladder and uterus. No evidence of the solid component of the mural nodule. Above imaging findings likely suggest of the mucinous histoadenoma of the right ovary. CA125 was done, which was 9, and the RMA index of the 9, as is in the perimenopausal period. Pap smear was negative for the interepithelial lesions. MRI was done, it was considered the USG findings 30 to 22 into 11.7 centimeter sized hypotensive lesions with a daughter cyst within it, largest which is the 5 into 5.6 centimeters. With features slightly suggestive of the neoplastic etiology with the mucinous cystadine of the right ovary. Left ovary is normal, uterus appears normal, there is no lymph node involvement in the places, junction zone is normal, the visualized lower part spines are normal. After the pre-anesthetic evaluation, patient is posted for the staging laparotomy. Intraoperatively, a large tumor of around 13 to 25 to 10 cm mass arises from the right ovary. So notice, the tumor was separate from the uterus with no infiltration of the surrounding structure or no other spillage of the cyst content. The left ovary and the salpinx are normal, uterus appear normal. As the patient is perimenopausal here with a completed family, we proceed with the total abdominal hysterectomy bilateral salpingooperative. This is the intraoperative findings of the tumor. On histopathological report, it showed that grossly the received specimen consists of the ovarian cyst mass measuring 13 to 25 to 20 cm, external surface smooth and glistening, cut surface is multicystic and show the mucinous fluid, solid hairs are not seen. On microscopic examination, section showed the cyst wall lined by the tall columnar mucinous epithelium. Cyst wall shows congestion and dilated blood vessels and mixed inflammatory cell infected. And with the impression mucinous cystadinum of the right ovary. A note on the mucinous tumors of ovary. They are the second most common surface epithelial tumor, represent about 8 to 10% of the epithelial ovarian tumors. Around 75 to 85% are the benign tumors, borderline accounting for 10 to 15% and the 5 to 10% malignant. Bilaterally seen in the 8 to 10% of the cases. Seen in the age group, the benign tumors are seen in the age group of the 30 to 50 years. They may reach enormous sizes, filling the entire abdominal cavity. Mucinous tumors are often associated with the other tumors like the dermoid cyst or the Brenner tumors in many cases. On cross examination, they are usually unilateral, multiloculated cysts, which on cut section show the multiple locules and honeycomb appearance. On histology, the tumors are lined by the columnar epithelium cells with a dark basal nuclei with apical mucin and resemble those of the endocervic, gastric pylorus of the intestine. 10 to 15% show the borderline mucinous tumors. The mucinous tumors of low malignant is very difficult to diagnose. While differential the mucinous epithelium may be seen immediately adjacent to the polydifferential focus. So it is important to take the multiple section from the many areas. Mucinous carcinoma, mucinous adenocarcinoma accounting for 5 to 10% of the cases. Bilateral tumors occur in the 8 to 10% of the cases. The mucinous lesions are confined to the ovary 95 to 98% of the cases. Because the most ovarian mucinous carcinoma contain the enteric type cells, they cannot be distinguished from the metastatic carcinoma of the GIT on the basis of the histology. They need a clinical correlation. A note on pseudomyxoma peritoneum. The mucinous tumors, usually mucinous cystadinoma, can sometimes rupture and cause the pseudomyxoma peritoneum, in which there is extensive mucinous ascites, cystic epithelial implants on the peritoneal surface and adhesion. It can cause the intestinal obstruction because of adhesion. Seen in the mucosal, usually the myxoma peritoneum is seen in the appendix of the gallbladder intestinal cancer. Treatment in these cases will be total abdominal hysterectomy, bilateral salpingooperative, removal of the mucin, peritoneal implants and even the appendix. The mucinous tumors with the prognosis have 5 years progress of the stage 1 in 94% and then 73% during the stage 2 with the stage 3 stage 4 accompanied by 28% of the survival. Thank you.
On opening, what features suggested that it is very likely to be a benign mucinous cystadinoma?
Ma'am, on examination of the mainly the large masses and the appearance of the mass.
The large size can be even malignant.
Appearance of the mass, the glistening cystic mass which show that it could be the mucinous tumors.
No, it is mucinous, but it could be mucinous cystadenocarcinoma also.
That is so in that
So
case
what you look for?
there is no ascites in that and other finding it is not
Ascites will appear in the later stage. Early stage 1 there may not be ascites. So what other features you will look for before the laparotomy, which may suggest one is your CA125 was there. But anything else on ultrasound you look for?
USG findings, ma'am. You can there will be iota score on that we can associate it is we can say that is a benign or the malignant case. So usually in the benign there will be usually it will be unilateral and if it is even if it is multiloculated it will be not more than 10 centimeters and on those there will be no ascites or the post-acoustic shadows at the malignant.
What I want to know, I want to say, papillary extensions, do it have any significance?
There will be the papillary extensions in the malignant cases.
So you look for it, isn't it?
Yes.
Whether there are intracystic or opening also, if the surface is, whether papillary extensions are on the surface, very likely that the peritoneal fluid also may turn out to be positive for malignancy. So papillary extensions are very, very important when you look for it. You said staging laparotomy done, isn't it?
Yes.
So how did you proceed with that staging laparotomy?
Usually we'll take the midline incisions even above the umbilicus, and after that we'll see if there is any ascites fluid in that. If there is no ascites, we will use the 100 ml NS and we will aspirate it and we will go for the histopathological report.
Peritoneal washing.
Peritoneal washing.
Then
After that, we'll see the lesions and the other peritoneal areas will be seen. With the clockwise direction, we'll go with the involvement of the colic, intercolic ascending colon and the flexures, right, and the transverse colon habitual flexures.
paracolic.
Paracolic gutter and the peritoneal involvement will be seen. And even you can take the biopsy of the omentum on this.
Next is presentation by Dr. Prati Jain. She is a junior resident in OBGYN department, DMGMC, Sirapur. She had done her BPS in HBT Medical College, Dr. R. N. Cooper Hospital, Mumbai. Has participated in HPV vaccine awareness program under the guidance of Dr. Vidya Tirankar Madam. Also participated in AMOX 2024 in paper and poster presentation. Over to you, Dr.
Good evening to one and all present over here. I am Dr. Prachi Jain. I am a junior resident at Dr. VMGMC Solapur. I'll be presenting a case on ovarian leiomyoma, a common tumor at an uncommon location. I have been guided by Dr. Vidya Tirankar, I am the head of the department at Dr. VMGMC Solapur. My patient is a 52-year-old female, Miss XYZ, hailing from Osmanabad, Hindu by religion and housewife by occupation, belonging to lower socio-economic class. Patient is a para-2 living to tubercumized patient with the chief complaint of pain in abdomen since the past 2 months. The pain in abdomen is dull aching in nature, gradual in onset, intermittent, non-progressive, non-radiating with no relieving and aggravating factors. There is no history of loss of appetite and weight. There is no history of any change in bowel and bladder habits, no history of fever and cough, and no history of nausea, vomiting or palpitations. The obstetric history: patient is married since 30 years and all 2 vaginal full-term deliveries which were not eventful. There is no history of any OCP consumption. Menstrual history: patient is postmenopausal since the past 2 years. The past cycles were regular, lasting for 4 to 5 days, occurring every 30 days with moderate flow. In her past history, she is a known case of hypertension, well controlled on tablet telmisartan 40 mg OD. Since the past 2 years, there is no history of any diabetes mellitus, no history of asthma, no history of tuberculosis. In family history, there is no history of any malignancies of the colon, breast, ovarian carcinoma. Her personal history is comprising of adequate sleep, appetite normal, and she denies any addiction. Her dietary history consists of mixed diet. On general examination, the patient's general condition is where she is well oriented to time, place and person. She is moderately built with a BMI of 22.9 kg per meter square. Her pulse rate is 82 per minute, regular in rhythm and good volume. BP is 110 by 70 mm of Hg. Panel is positive with no icterus, edema, cyanosis, clubbing, lymphadenopathy. The thyroid and breast examination are within normal limits. On systemic examination, the cardiovascular and the respiratory system are within normal limits. On per abdomen examination, there is a bulging of the lower abdomen with a vertical scar of 2 cm of tubectomy below the umbilicus. The umbilicus is inverted with no dilated vein scar cyanosis. On palpation, the mass of uterus size corresponding to 18 to 20 weeks of 12 into 10 into 8 cm. The mass is well defined, non-tender, firm in consistency and occupying the right inguinal, right lumbar and umbilical region. Smooth surface, regular margin, firm in consistency. The mobility is slightly restricted from side to side, but it is present from side to side and up and down both. There is no guarding and rigidity and no organomegaly seen. On percussion, there is dull note over the mass and tympanic over the rest of the abdomen, and on auscultation, there is no brewing note. On local examination, the external genitalia appears to be normal. The cervix and vaginal examination are within normal limits. On bimanual examination, the uterus is atrophic with right left forenational fullness present. A mass of 12 into 10 into 8 centimeter present with smooth surface, regular margins, firm in consistency, felt separately from the uterus. A groove is seen between the mass and the uterus, which is the Hingorani sign positive. Movements of mass are not transmitted to the cervix. On rectal examination, there is no nodularity felt. My provisional diagnosis based on the history and examination is paratotype to postmenopausal female with adnexal mass under evaluation, probably of benign etiology. My differential diagnosis of the same will be a solid ovarian lesion based on the firm consistency, the differentials of which are a fibroma, a thecoma or a Brenner's tumor. The other differential diagnosis will be a parovarian tumor, a broad ligament fibroid or a ovarian neoplasm. All the investigations were within normal limits. Her LFT, RFT were normal. Her CA125 was 5 units per ml. USG findings were suggestive of a solid mass lesion of 9 into 8 into 5 centimeter with acoustic shadow noted in the left adnexa with few flow signals in the periphery part of the lesion. The left ovary is significantly not seen separately from the above mentioned lesion, and the compressed ovarian parenchyma shows follicles with an ecogenic cream with no or poor parenchymal flow signals. The right ovary is normal and the endometrial thickness was 4 mm. The differentials given on USG findings were suggestive of an ovarian thecoma or a fibroma, an ovarian leiomyoma or a large pedunculated subserosal uterine leiomyoma. PAP report was negative for intraepithelial lesion of malignancy. The RMI index was 15, which is suggestive of low risk of malignancy. After pre-anesthetic checkup, the patient was taken for a staging laparotomy. The intraoperative findings were suggestive of uterus was atrophic in nature. The right tubo-ovarian relationship was maintained. On the left hand side, there was an ovarian tumor with a smooth surface approximately 10 into 8 centimeters, and the tumor was distinctly separated from the uterus and the broad ligament. On dissection of the broad ligament, there was no extension seen of the mass into the broad ligament, and there was no accompanying uterine mass felt. The right salpinx ovary were normal on inspection. The mass was seen dangling between the infundibular pelvic ligament on one side and the ovarian ligament on the other side. This is the pathology picture, the picture of the mass that was seen. It is the mass had a bossylated surface, and on cut section there were whorled appearances of the mass, and the ovary was not seen separately from the mass. The histopathology report was suggestive of a leiomyoma with cystic changes along with the ovarian tissue in the mass itself, and the uterus, there were no evidence of leiomyomas in the uterus. Discussion. Leiomyoma of the ovary is one of the rarest benign tumors of the ovary, presentation resembling a solid ovarian benign tumor. It is actually one of the differential diagnoses of a solid ovarian tumor and most commonly diagnosed on histological examination. The most common presenting age of patients is 25 to 65 years, and they are mostly premenopausal when they are diagnosed. Their presentation is asymptomatic, but if they present to us, the most common presentation is of abdominal pain. The other differentials are mass per abdomen, hydronephrosis, pressure symptoms, elevated CA125 and mixed syndrome in some cases. There are two theories for the origin of leiomyoma. The one theory suggests that the leiomyoma probably arising from the smooth muscle cells in the ovarian hilar blood vessels or the ovarian ligament, or they arise from the multipotent cells that are already present in the ovarian stroma. They often coexist with the uterine leiomyoma, suggesting a common etiology or an identical hormonal stimulation. The diagnosis is difficult to be made on by naked eye. It is actually a histopathological diagnosis, and smooth muscle actin is the immunohistochemical on immunohistochemistry. Smooth muscle actin will be positive in fibromas and leiomyomas. Immunohistochemical analysis to demonstrate smooth muscle differentiation, especially desmin, can usually be helpful in distinction between leiomyomas and fibromas. Malignancy potential, the tumor is already very rare, it's less than 1% of the cases, and in those tumors also less than 0.1 have a potential to grow into malignancy, that is a leiomyosarcoma. The malignancy potential is more when they are associated with leiomyosarcomas of the uterus. And Ki67 is an index protein that affects the growth potential and the monoclonal doubling potential of the cells. Treatment of the leiomyoma of the ovary in young patients is unilateral salpingo-oophorectomy in family complete patients. Since our patient was a postmenopausal female, 52-year-old, we proceeded with the total abdominal hysterectomy, bilateral salpingo-oophorectomy. Thank you.
About Hingorani sign. What is that? Hingorani sign.
Ma'am, a groove is present between the mass and the lesion, mass and the uterus.
Actually, it was devised for what condition? It was previously when ultrasound was not available to differentiate to find out whether it was a uterine mass or ovarian. So it was in those days between the uterus and the ovarian cyst, a deep Trendelenburg was given. If it had been ovarian tumor, it pushed out and there was a groove which suggested that it is not a uterine mass. So that was Hingorani sign. Actually, Hingorani sign has no much significance today because ultrasound is available today. Okay. So and that was with pregnancy. And what is fibroma of ovary?
Ma'am, fibroma of the ovary is one of the differential diagnoses of a solid tumor where the stroma, there is on microscopic examination there are fibroblasts present.
Arises from
The stroma of the ovary.
connective tissues.
Connective tissue.
And this arises from the muscular
Muscular.
element.
Yes.
Next to her, invited Dr. Kathy Digley. She is MBBS DGO, has doing MS in BMGS Medical College. She is a GR3 junior resident. Has done her MBBS at D.Y. Patil Medical College, Kolhapur. DGO at Tinimbadia Hospital, Kolhapur, under Dr. Parik Madam. Also participated in AMOX 2024 for paper presentation and poster presentation. Over to you, Kranti. She has presented on serious adenoma.
Patient 54 years old, para2 living to postmenopausal post-tuberculosis patient, belonging to middle class of socio-economic status, clerk by occupation, came with complaint of abdominal distension since 1 month, PV bleeding since 15 days. My patient was apparently alright 1 month back. Then she noticed mass arising up to umbilicus, which increased over a period of 1 month, which does not vary with curve, posture and straightening. She noticed vaginal bleeding since 15 days, on and off about 1 to 2 pads per day, not associated with pain or history of passage of clot, no history of loss of appetite, weight loss, no history of breathlessness, no history of altered bowel bladder habits. Menstrual history, postmenopausal is 6 years, age of menarche is 14 years, age of menopause is 48 years. Obstetric history is para2 living to, both are full-term normal delivery, spontaneous conception, history of breastfeeding for 2 years for each child, no history of contraceptive pills use, tuberculosis done 22 years back. Past history, recently diagnosed hypothyroidism and diabetes mellitus, started on treatment, tablet Thyronol 25 microgram, OD and tablet metformin 500 mg OD. History of appendicectomy done at the age of 20 years. Personal history, diet is mixed, appetite is slightly reduced, bowel and bladder habits are regular, no any addictions. Family history, no history of breast, ovarian and gastrointestinal malignancy in family. On general examination, weight was 55, height is 157, BMI 22.3. Pulse BP are normal, then no thyroid, breast or spine abnormalities are seen. Systemic examination, CVS within normal limit, RS within normal limit, CNS conscious oriented, cooperative, well oriented to type of patient person. On per abdominal examination, inspection, uniformly distended abdomen, tuberculosis scar was present, infraumbilical. Appendicectomy scar present in right iliac fossa, hernial orifices are normal, no dilated veins, umbilicus is everted. Palpation, mass occupying all quadrants of abdomen, non-tender mass corresponding to 30 to 32 weeks of gravid uterus, smooth surface, cystic inconsistency, margins well demarcated, lower border of mass could not be reached. Percussion, blood growth all over the abdomen but not over the flanks, no shifting vellus was seen. On auscultation, bowel sounds heard only in upper quadrants. For speculum examination, vaginal mucosa is pink, rugosity is present, cervix flushed with vagina, no ulcer or erosion seen on the cervix, minimal bleeding present. Per vaginal examination, uterus size could not be appreciated due to huge mass. Mass fed through both fornices. Both fornices are shallow, non-tender, no cervical motion tenderness. Mass does not move with cervical motion. Per rectal examination, rectal mucosa is free, no nodules felt. Diagnosis: para 2 leading to postmenopausal bleeding with coherent mass and a revolution. Investigation: her HB is 11.6 and other parameters are normal except BSL is raised, that is fasting is 141, postprandial 220, and TSH level is also raised. HbA1c was 6.8 as she was newly diagnosed diabetic patient. Then her CA125 is 42 units per ml. UHG suggestive of large, well-defined, unequal abdominopelvic multicystic lesion measuring 15 by 22 by 24 cm, seen with thin septations with no solid component seen. Bilateral lobe is not separately visualized. Uterus retroverted, adenomyotic changes presence. DT is 5 mm. Dilatation and curettage done. Endometrial tissue sent for HPR. Histopathology report suggestive of secretory changes. Management: medicine reference done in view of uncontrolled BSL and raised TSH. Pre-anesthetic fitness done. Patient posted for staging laparotomy. Intraoperative findings are uneventful. Mass is not attached anywhere. It is both tubes are normal. Left ovary is normal size. Mass arising from right ovary and right ovary not separately sealed. Then specimen consisting of peritoneal fluid, uterus and bilateral fallopian tubes with left ovary and right ovary sent for histopathology. Intraoperative pictures are like this. 10 ml reddish peritoneal fluid, ascitic fluid cytology was like this. 10 ml reddish peritoneal fluid, 18% lymphocyte, 20% neutrophil, plenty of RBCs are seen. Histopathological report suggestive of benign seromucinous cystadenoma of ovary. Uterus shows uterus endometrium shows saline cystic hypertrophy, and myometrium shows adenomyosis changes. Histopathological picture. Discussion: epithelial tumors are common ovarian neoplasms. They arise from the surface epithelium and adjacent stoma. Seromucinous cystadenoma constitute 20 to 50% of ovarian neoplasm, and mucinous cystadenoma accounts for 15 to 25%. Recent 2024 WHO classification of tumors of female reproductive organs introduced a new class of ovarian neoplasm called as seromucinous tumors. Morphologically, these tumors are composed of serous endocervical type of mucinous epithelium along with endometrioid, indifferentiate and squamous types of epithelium. Epithelial tumor composed of endocervical type mucinous serous endometrioid cell, undifferentiated cell with abundant eosinophilic cytoplasm without cellular eutypia are classified as benign tumors. Tumors with complex papillary architecture and epithelium showing variable cellular stratification, mild to moderate cytological eutypia without stromal invasion are classified as a borderline tumor. Tumors with similar architecture and epithelial lining having either marked cytological eutypia or cruciform growth pattern with structural with stromal invasion of 5 mm in diameter in any focus are classified as a malignant tumors. Conclusion: in 2024 WHO classification of tumors, female genital have introduced a new category of ovarian tumor as a seromucinous tumors. These tumors are also subclassified as a benign, borderline and malignant tumor. Hence, proper histopathological diagnosis is important for better treatment and to reduce use of aggressive therapy. Thank you.
Before investigating, what did you have in your mind? What it could be? To give a clue, she was postmenopausal bleeding and an ovarian tumor.
Estrogen secreting tumor might be.
Functioning ovarian tumor. Then, why did she have endometrial thickness? How much was it?
5 mm, yes. As she is already postmenopausal, less than 4 mm is ideal. 5 mm, and she was bleeding since 15 days. That's why it might be the lesser.
And DNC was also done. This surgery.
Yes.
do you think is the cause of her
Bleeding.
Why due to hormonal changes,
just post-mortem?
the estrogen secreting tumor may cause tumor bleeding. In case of benign tumors also there is a hypertrophy and hyperplasia of all the cell forms. The coherent epithelium secretes estrogen. If that small quantity of estrogen causes PV bleeding.
She has practicing as a OBGYN consultant at Kumtekar Hospital, Solapur since last 15 years. She has done MRCOG, MS, DNB, MCPS, DGO, PG, DMLS, diploma in endovascular. She has passed MRCOG Part A examination. Over to you, Amruta. Amruta is going to tell about the epithelial cell carcinoma of the ovary. Over to you.
Thank you, Dalita. Very good evening to all respected seniors and colleagues. As we all are aware, the incidence of gynecological malignancies is steadily rising. Though there is some change in the pattern of malignancies, like the incidence of CA cervix is decreasing, but on the contrary, the incidence of CA ovary and endometrium is rising. Today I am going to present a case of epithelial cell carcinoma of the ovary, which was recently managed at our hospital by Dr. Parag Kumtekar sir. She was a 40-year-old lady prior to living to. She presented with abdominal pain, distension, bloating and indigestion. There was no significant medical surgical history. There was no family history of malignancy. She had regular menstrual cycles. On investigations on abdominal ultrasound, there was a large ovarian mass around 25 by 19 centimeter and there were no other abnormal findings. All routine blood investigations were unremarkable. Her CA-125 value was more than 1,600 international units per liter. CT scan showed a solid cystic neoplastic mass, about 16 centimeters in maximum dimensions, abutting urinary bladder and rectum, with maintained fat planes, minimal ascites, few bilateral sub-centimeter pelvic nodes. There were no other organ metastases like lungs, liver or vertebra. So our treatment plan was exploratory laparotomy with a primary cytoreductive surgery, that is TAH plus BSO plus omentectomy, bilateral pelvic lymph node dissection and peritoneal fluid sampling. Why did we not choose chemotherapy first? Because on ultrasound and CT scan, the fat planes were clearly maintained and the mass appeared resectable upfront. And secondly, biopsy was not possible since the mass was predominantly cystic with solid components which were very deep in pelvis and covered by bowels. Secondly, there was no gross ascites to tap or send for cytology. And thirdly, the mass appeared upfront resectable on CT scan. So we chose surgery first. We did cardiac fitness and patient was fit for surgery. So intraoperative findings were there were bilateral ovarian masses. And those masses were adherent to the uterus. Rectum and bladder were compressed but not infiltrated. There were few omental nodules noted. There was no ascites. Few iliac nodes were enlarged bilaterally, predominantly in the obturator fossa, that is internal iliac zone. Liver, retroperitoneal, aortocaval regions were normal, spleen was normal. There were no peritoneal deposits, that is in paracolic gutters, lesser sac and mesentery. So these are the intraoperative findings. There is a huge mass seen here. So the histopathology report came as high-grade serous cystadenoma of both the ovaries. Omental deposits were positive. 3 out of 26 nodes were positive in the internal iliac region. Ascitic fluid samples were positive. So the final diagnosis was CA ovary bilateral, stage 3C. So since in view of aggressive nature of the malignancy, 6 to 8 cycles of paclitaxel and carboplatin chemotherapy were planned, and patient is currently undergoing chemotherapy. She has completed 2 cycles and she is in good health. So let us just have a brief discussion about ovarian malignancy. According to WHO classification scheme, the tumors of ovary are basically classified as serous tumors, mucinous tumors, endometrioid tumors, clear cell tumors, Brenner tumors, and seromucinous tumors. As we all know, histologically ovary is divided into two layers, the peripheral cortex and the central medulla. Cortex mainly contains all the ovarian follicles, and medulla is the central loose connective tissue which contains blood vessels, lymphatic species and nerves. So the epithelial carcinoma of ovary mainly arises from the surface epithelium of the ovary. Serous tumors we can classify as serous cystadenoma or adenofibroma, which are completely benign. Then serous borderline tumors, also called as atypical proliferative serous tumors. Serous borderline tumors micropapillary variant, that is non-invasive low-grade serous carcinoma. Then in carcinoma we have low-grade serous carcinoma and high-grade serous carcinoma. So we had the last one in our case. So just let us just see what how high-grade serous carcinoma presents. The risk factors are family history of breast and ovarian cancer, infertility, and the protective factors are multiparity, breastfeeding, late menarche, and use of oral contraceptive pills. High-grade serous carcinoma of the ovary are the most frequent ovarian carcinomas, around 70%. Main age of presentation is 6th and 7th decade of life. This is contrary to our case who presented at the age of 40 years. Peritoneal and fallopian tube high-grade serous carcinomas are identical, and the recent theory is most of the serous carcinomas arise from the tubal type epithelium in the femoral part of the fallopian tube. They are also called as serous tubal intraepithelial carcinoma, that is STIC. And the most common gene mutation is TP53 in most of the cases, but in 15% of the cases we may see BRCA1 and BRCA2 germline mutations. 80% patients present with stage 3 and stage 4. That's 80% patients will present in the late stage. CA125 is generally more than 35 in more than 90% of the patients. They usually present with abdominal pain, distension, urinary frequency, and vaginal bleeding. Generally, the specimen is huge, up to 20 centimeters in diameter. There are solid papillary and cystic areas. There can be serous or bloody cysts within the specimen. There can be areas of hemorrhage and necrosis, and omental metastases are often present. In microscopy, there is papillary architecture, and that's why the name papillary serous carcinoma of the ovary. There are slit-like glandular species, cribriform areas, pleomorphic bizarre nuclei, frequent mitotic figures, tumor giant cells, and psammoma bodies. We can also classify these tumors into type 1 and type 2. Type 1 tumors mainly have the BRAF or KRAS mutation, and they have a slightly better prognosis. They are the low-grade tumors. And type 2 tumors which have P53 mutation are the high-grade tumors. And the STIC variety also falls into type 2 tumors. This 15 to 20% of the cases, there is hereditary predisposition in ovarian serous carcinomas, that is BRCA1, BRCA2 mutation. Now just for the sake of completion, let us also cover what are the recent things. So there are certain prognostic, predictive and other markers which can be used in this management. Then there are certain cancers which are platinum resistant. So there are other options in the treatment of these cancers such as bevacizumab, PARP inhibitors and other small molecule targeting agent. Then there are certain newer drugs like mirvetuximab and surastansine, of which the trials are still underway. So thank you for your patient listening.
Protective factors. I want to know from
I would like to invite
primary approach surgery or chemotherapy.
I would like to invite Dr. Parag on stage for
Parag on stage, please.
Well, Parag, before you answer Madam's question,
Yes.
but I understand, as long as we don't disturb the capsule of the ovary, stage 1A tumor, okay, it is a good prognosis. Once we try to take a biopsy, we are puncturing the capsule, and maybe we convert 1A to 1C, and the prognosis varies a lot.
Yes.
So your first take on this, and then
Yes, sir. Now, current guidelines do not recommend any contralateral normal aware biopsies, which we used to recommend. If one ovary, or for example, you are exploring for one ovary, and you think other ovary is normal. Even for benign diseases, it was earlier thought that you can take biopsy from the other ovary. Now that biopsy of the other ovary theory is gone.
no, I am not talking about the other ovary. Before laparotomy,
Yes.
would you ever aspirate the ovarian tissue, send it for histopathology or cytology, and then decide whether this patient needs chemotherapy before you explore her?
That would be very early stage, so that doesn't even fit in the criteria of chemotherapy first. Chemotherapy first is in, as the madam was there, it is in chemotherapy first or surgery first. It purely depends on whether we are able to achieve adequate cytoreduction. Now, definition of adequate cytoreduction is any visible residual tissue which can be removed within 1 centimeter. That is definition of primary cytoreduction, or that is complete cytoreduction. Now, cytoreduction, it can involve normally we remove the ovary, TH, BSO, omentectomy, we do pelvic lymph node dissection is recommended right up to the paraortic lymph nodes, paracolic tissue biopsies are taken. Now, even some deposits on liver, stomach, pancreas or spleen, you can remove those parts also. Even you can do nephrectomy, you can do radical cystectomy partial also. Now, if this increases the morbidity a lot, so if you think that you are not going to get adequate cytoreduction with respectable morbidity, then we go for chemotherapy first. All the long-term studies have shown that there is no difference between going chemo first versus surgery first. You can operate first and give 6 cycles later. You can give first chemo 6 first and operate later, or you can do sandwich therapy where you do 3 cycles of chemotherapy, then operate and then go for chemotherapy later on. So it all depends on cytoreductive capacities.
Yeah, that's true, but how do you decide what chemotherapy is to be given unless you have a histological picture with you? So without biopsy, we cannot go ahead with chemotherapy. That's it.
Yes. Okay. So those tumors which require neoadjuvant chemotherapy either have raw ascites which is easily tappable, so that you can get a site and that is positive, or secondly the tumor is so big and huge, or sometimes you get some tissues, some diaphragmatic deposits, or then you can biopsy safely. You don't need to go deep in the pelvis to biopsy those. But biopsy is compulsory for chemotherapy.
Thank you.
So, in case you have open and see,
Yes. Yes.
take a biopsy. If you find it is not operable, close.
Then we can go. If such a dilemma exists, then diagnostic laparoscopy would be a better option. We could put a scope. If we feel that it is lost there, the symptom, we simply take a biopsy laparoscopically and we back out and then we shift to neoadjuvant chemotherapy.
Dr. Parag, since 80% of them are diagnosed in late stage, so do you recommend any screening method so that say at 50 or 60 or 70, at that age, as a routine CA125 or some?
Yes. A lot of trials have been undergone for this. Multiple trials have shown that any amount of testing, trans-abdominal sonography, transvaginal sonography, CA125 screening, any other new markers, that has no benefit in overall survival or early detection of ovarian cancers. Only in proven BRCA1, BRCA2 patients, those who are not willing for a risk reduction salpingo-oophorectomy, those who are on surveillance, slight reduction in risk is there. So all studies have shown that there is absolutely no screening criteria available for ovarian cancer.
probably we can say those who have a family history of ovarian malignancy, those who have a family history of ovarian malignancy, they should undergo a vigorous screening every year with CA125, etc. And now the recent is that if those who I'm talking about a relative close mine, who had 3 generations had ovarian malignancy, 4th generation at age of 40, she's in US, at age of 40, her oophorectomy has been done because she was BRCA1 positive.
Yes. Now
So
that
this is what.
in fact that is beneficial if even the restrictions salpingorectomy not only reduces the ovarian and fallopian malignancies, it reduces the breast cancer risk
Also, yes. So if positive history of malignancy in the family, this screening is must for them. But
Best
otherwise,
is to go for RRS or restricted
Yes.
salpingorectomy. And BRCA2 also prophylactic bilateral mastectomy is also done in US, though not so common in our setups.
suppose there is a history in that family. If one generation is BRCA negative,
Yes.
is it that the next generation will not suffer from CA1?
But no, ma'am, the criteria for screening are very clear. 3 or more direct relatives for BRCA testing. And then if BRCA is positive, then that is the family.
If
Yes.
positive,
Yes.
but suppose the mother and father is from the same family from where CA-OV is there.
Okay.
He is BRCA negative. His daughters have a chance of, because he is negative of her, his daughters, do they have a chance of having CA-OV? Because what he was saying, that one generation if it escapes, there are no chances. Is it
Yes.
so?
Because it's not a recessive gene, it's a dominant gene. Either it will be expressed or it will not passed on. Recessive genes, in 50% cases, they might remain dormant and then other may carry out one generation down.
Yes.
But in dominant genes, it has to be either expressed or not passed on. So BRCA is a dominant gene. So I think that is the reason why once it is not passed on, the risk will be cut off at that level.
Thank you.
Screening and the chemo radio sandwich therapy and all these things. We are going at the middle of the clinical meetings. I will like to introduce lectures on the ovarian reserve by Dr. Meenal Chudgupkar. She is consultant at the Chudgupkar Hospitals and senior infertility and IVF specialist at the Apollo Hospital, Solapur. Over to you, Dr. Meenal Chudgupkar.
हॅलो ॲक्च्युली ओव्हरीजवर क्लिनिकल मीटिंग ह्या सरदेसाई मॅडमनी सांगितलं तेव्हा आमच्याकडे फक्त 2 केसेस होत्या आणि मी अमृताला म्हटलं की अमृता तू हुडकून काढ बाई तुझी एक केस माझी एक केस आणि विद्या तिरडकर मॅडमनी अचानक आम्हाला गिफ्ट दिल्यासारख्या 3 केसेस नवीन मिळाल्या ओव्हरी ट्यूमरच्या आणि चांगलं डिस्कशन झालं. हे सगळं स्पॉन्सर आपले जे MR करत आहेत सन फार्माचे त्यांचं ओव्हॅरियन रिझर्व्हवर हे एक आहे डिस्क्रिप्शन आपण सगळ्यांनी द्यावं.
चौधरी मॅडमनी पण दिलेत ना केस.
चौधरी मॅडमनी ह्या केसेस दिल्या. चौधरी मॅडम मी मेडिकल कॉलेजचे सगळे सर आणि मॅडम आम्हाला हेल्प करतात. पहिल्यांदा त्यांनी त्या केसेस दिल्या आणि नंतर मग GHSच्या केसेस मिळाल्या. तर आम्ही त्यांच्या केसेस ऑन्को सर्जन बरोबर डिस्कस करायच्या म्हणून थोड्या उशिरा केला होता.
Today I am going to discuss about understanding ovarian reserve. In today's clinical meet of everything about ovarian tumor, benign and malignant, this is little different topic where we all will discuss and see about this molecule, how it works. Infertility is a complex disorder. It is estimated to affect as many as 186 million people worldwide, with significant influence on medical, psychosocial and economic aspects. Though frequency and origin of different forms of infertility differs, almost 40 to 50% of these cases are due to female cause. There is a rise of female infertility and maybe because of increasing maternal age. And the proportion of women who remain childless are increasing progressively with the increasing age at the time of marriage. So we are discussing about ovarian anatomy and physiology. Ovary basically contains ova, that's eggs, and female ova play an important role in determining embryo competence. The folliculogenesis has following sequence like primordial follicles, primary, preantral, antral, and then ultimately after ovulation we get corpus luteum. So activation of follicle growth, then ECA recruitment factors, then limited androgen production and ovulation are important factors in the folliculogenesis. The role of androgens in follicular maturation is also important, and androgens affect follicle maturation at very early stages. So the selection dominance is the stage where androgen has importance and even atresia. Life history of ovarian follicles may be initial recruitment and cyclic recruitment, ovulation and then depletion. Why do oocytes require ATP? It requires ATP for successful fertilization, to produce higher quality blastocysts after fertilization. Embryo implantation potential is correlated with the ATP content of the embryo, and after fertilization to support critical events of cell division. The important factor we all need to understand is oxidative stress. The balance between radical oxidative stress and antioxidants within the follicle this is the critical for function of oocyte and the granulosa cells. Oxidative stress occurs at many levels during infertility treatment. There may be lifestyle factors, there may be reproductive pathology and physiology, and there are reactive oxygen species which are responsible for the IUGR, preterm labor and spontaneous abortion as well as infertility. The free radicals function in microenvironments of oocytes and in follicular fluid, and the changes in these microenvironments directly impact follicular development, ovulation, quality of oocytes, sperm-oocyte interaction, implantation, and early embryonic development. In damaged oocytes, there is a physical and chemical stimulation by aging or ovulation process and increased oxidative stress. Then follicular atresia, apoptosis, and number of follicle decrease, and ovarian reserve also decreases. Mitochondrial activity decreases, ATP synthesis decreases, antioxidant enzyme activity decreases, and the chromosomal damage increases. The summary is like poor oocyte quality, which causes decreased embryo development and luteal phase defects, and ultimately infertility. The ovarian reserve. So ultimately, what is ovarian reserve? The women's reproductive potential with respect to ovarian follicle number and oocyte quality. The total ovarian reserve is non-growing follicles and growing follicles, and the growing follicles are responsible for the ovarian reserve. This total ovarian reserve decreases with time, and continuous follicle recruitment happens, and with age there is decreased embryo quality with advancing age, decreased spontaneous fecundity, and decreased oocyte number, embryo number, pregnancy rate, and aneuploidy increases. The rationale with this molecule is like it contains all three: DHEA, melatonin, and coenzyme Q10. So all these factors, how responsible for decreasing oxidative stress, we are going to see. This is an improvement in the fertilization rate, may lead to better pregnancy outcome and lowering of the miscarriage rate. So melatonin, the role of gamete biology has a diverse functions at various stages of follicle development, oocyte maturation and luteal phase. Melatonin improves oocyte quality, enhances oocyte maturation, recruitment and selection of follicles, and role in the ovulation and the luteal phase. So supplementation of mitochondrial nutrients may lead to the improvement in the oocyte and embryo quality and a healthy pregnancy outcome. So this coenzyme Q10, which is a mitochondrial nutrient. DHEA it improves the ovarian reserve, it improves ovarian environment. IGF-1 factor augments, reduce apoptosis, and it is a pro-hormone. So this when all the three factors are there, then it is very important for the further improvement in the ovarian result. Melatonin was first isolated in 1958. Basically from the pineal, it is synthesized in the pineal gland, and since last decade has been more focus on melatonin and its function in the reproductive organs. It is a broad spectrum antioxidant or suicidal antioxidant. Why it is called like that? It is most important antioxidant in the ovarian follicle. It does not promote oxidation under any circumstances, and its metabolites are also capable of acting as antioxidants, that is causing scavenging cascade reaction. It enhances activity of other endogenous antioxidants including glutathione, superoxide dismutase, and it has synergy with the vitamin C, vitamin E and glutathione. It increases embryo development and oocyte quality and fetal viability. Melatonin may become medicine of choice for improving oocyte quality for women who are unable to become pregnant because of poor oocyte quality. It stimulates maturation, it decreases intrafollicular oxidative damage, and it influences sex steroid production at different stages of ovarian follicular maturation. The elevated concentration of melatonin in pre-ovulatory follicle may be involved in the progesterone production, resulting in the luteinization and ovulation, and elevated melatonin in luteal phase and early pregnancy may induce progesterone production by luteal cells, which is necessary for successful pregnancy. There are few meta-analyses which have given importance of the preference that higher rate of good embryos are formed when the melatonin is given in that cycle. The association between melatonin concentration in follicular fluid and the oocyte quality allows pre-ovulatory follicle to fully develop and provide competent oocyte for fertilization. Now, the other important factor is a mitochondrial nutrient coenzyme Q10. We know about mitochondria, which has inner membrane, outer membrane, cristae and matrix. Coenzyme Q10 increases mitochondrial function. It is essential part of cellular energy production. Almost 95% of energy is generated here. It restores normal energy production in the ovary. So coenzyme Q10 is responsible for the ATP production in mitochondria. It restores normal energy production. It is antioxidant and it protects from oxidative stress. So other effects, the ovulation rate, delayed ovarian follicle loss in aging, improves oocyte quality, significantly increased number of ovulated oocytes, improves ovarian response, improves ovulation rate, and reduces chromosomal abnormalities and increase of cumulus cells. So compared post-meiotic oocyte aneuploidy rate, CoQ10 and placebo, and is a trial which is randomized clinical study, and the clinical pregnancy rate is 33% when the CoQ is given, and the rate of aneuploidy is decreased to 46%. Now DHEA, dehydroepiandrosterone, most abundant circulating steroid in humans. It is secreted into adrenal glands, testes, ovaries. It is synthesized from cholesterol. It can be converted into other hormones, example estrogen and testosterone. Levels of DHEA decline with age. It may, the condition and dosage, usually 75 mg DHEA supplementation at least for 4 months is required. It is well tolerated and safer than any other androgens. DHEA basically increases AMH level, increases ovulation rates, then FSH receptors are increased, ovarian steroidogenesis is increased, and prevents granulosa cell apoptosis that causes the increased pregnancy rate. So benefits of DHEA supplementations are improvement in the ovarian reserve, ovarian environment, oocyte embryo quality, increases pregnancy rate like births and decreases aneuploidy and miscarriage rate. So in summary, maintenance of female fertility is on the proper functioning of the ovary is important. Ovarian function depends on the maintenance and the normal development of ovarian follicles. Oxidative stress affects assisted fertility and natural fertility also. So this unique compound combination has all the three important factors which we discussed just now. So helps pre-ovulatory follicle to fully develop and provide competent oocyte for fertilization. It improves ovarian function, oocyte embryo quality, ovarian environment and decreased aneuploidy. And that causes improvement in the fertilization rate, better pregnancy outcomes, lower miscarriage rate. Thank you.
Now, in connection with ovarian malignancy, I want to know from Meenal, for granulosa cell tumor, for follow-up, we used to use inhibin B. Recently, I was told by Dr. Dable that inhibin B has no role. Then
not investigated routinely. So
routine for follow-up because they have a very high potential. So does your AMH has to play any role in follow-up? Are you aware of this?
Ovarian reserving infertility.
Not infertility, ovarian malignancy we are coming back.
Session of ovarian malignancy. Coming back to that.
Come back to ovarian malignancy. Granulosa cell tumors who have a very high potential, malignant potential. When we have to follow, we used to do inhibin B. But recently Dr. Dable said inhibin B had no role. Then how do we follow them? So I was told that AMH and estradiol have. Now you both enlighten us.
It was misinterpreted when I say inhibin has no role. Inhibin is not routinely done. Okay. So we tried sending the samples, but we got very erratic reports because we get good reports of those hormones which are regularly being done because they have to run the controls also.
Okay.
And so AMH is a better predictor. Any patient with AMH more than 15, we must suspect ovarian malignancy first.
Okay.
Okay.
So this is AMH has to play a role in ovarian malignancy. More than 50, no?
I beg your pardon, just whatever the company might have given you the slides, no doubt about that. I don't want to say anything about that. But one slide mentions that giving this BHA improves AMH. Okay. Because AMH is anyway released by small antral and preantral follicles, those numbers are fixed. Okay, in any woman. So that number is not going to increase and DH is not going to increase those number of follicles. What DH is going to do is it's going to make the follicles responsive to the gonadotropies which are coming. So it really doesn't improve the AMH but it improves the responsiveness of the follicles.
Thank you Dr. Meenal Chandukar and thank you Dr. Dable sir and Dr. Sardesai madam come to the topic of our ovarian tumor. I welcome Dr. Fahim Golewale. After Dr. Ashwini Jadhav case, we will take the two late Ashwini cases.
Good evening all. I am Dr. Ashwini Jadhav, second year resident student of Markandeya Vinayaka Solapur. Thank you OBGYN Society for giving me opportunity to present this case. I am presenting this case under guidance of Dr. Neeta Ghate. This is the case of post-hysterectomized patient ovarian huge serous hysterectomy case. 52 years old lady, gully para, post-hysterectomized, total abdominal hysterectomy was done. Housewife, resident of Solapur, visited OPD on 19 December 2022 with the chief complaints of heaviness in lower abdomen since 1 month, distension of abdomen since 1 month, and she was having low-grade fever since last 10 days. History of present illness. Patient was apparently alright 1 month back when she noticed fullness of lower abdomen, which was associated with heaviness and bloating of abdomen. Since 1 month, patient was having distended abdomen to the present size of approximately 24 weeks of uterus size, which was associated with dull aching continuous pain, and it relieves after taking medications. She complains of constipation, which relieves after taking laxatives. She doesn't notice any weight loss, loss of appetite, nausea, vomiting symptoms. Also, patient was operated for total abdominal hysterectomy 10 years back for abnormal uterine bleeding leiomyoma. Her previous reports were not available with her. So, patient has no history of hypertension, diabetes, any Graves' disease, any thyroid disease, or any family history of malignancy. Her menstrual history, menarche was at the age of 10 years. She has had surgical menopause 10 years back, and her previous cycles were regular. Obstetric history, she has married life of 32 years. She was a case of primary infertility and had taken treatment for the same that time. Her family history, personal history and any drug history was not significant. On examination, patient was conscious, cooperative, moderately built and well nourished. Her BP was 120/80, pulse rate 80 per minute, no pallor icterus, cyanosis clubbing, and no any lymphadenopathy was noted. Thyroid and breast examination was also normal. On abdominal examination, inspection, there was a lump in lower abdomen, distended up to umbilicus. Umbilicus centrally placed and inverted. Flanks were not full. On palpation, inspectory findings were confirmed, and the lump was palpable in lower abdomen of approximately 24 weeks pregnant uterus size. The lump was non-tender, cystic in consistency, and lower part of the mass was not reachable. On pelvic examination, per speculum examination shows cervix and vagina with atopic changes for that age. And on bimanual examination, non-tender mass, cystic mass consistency extending up to umbilicus of approximately 24 week size uterus was palpable, and her fornices were not full, uterus was not palpable. So patient was came with the report of USG from outside. USG report shows oval mass measuring 14 into 21 centimeter, seen occupying pelvis, extending to left hypochondriac region with the multiple septations. So it was serous cystadenoma likely. No ascites, no effusion, or no any other lymphadenopathy noted, and all other pelvic organs were normal. So this was her USG report. So she came with the CT scan report also, which was from outside also. She noted large CT scan report shows large multilocular predominantly cystic space occupying mass lesion, and this mass was with a well-defined thin capsule. There was multiple thin septations with mass dividing into multiple loculi. There was no any intramural enhancing nodule, and mass was measuring approximately 20 into 16 into 25 centimeter of size. And the likely, but the it was not mentioned whether it is benign or malignant neoplasm. So it was just written that it was ovarian neoplasm. So we advised for CA-125, which came out to be normal. So from these reports, we calculated her RMI index, which came out 21.42, which suggests the low malignancy index. So patient was advised, our differential diagnosis was ovarian tumor, and so patient was advised admission, and on 27 December, all investigations were done, and patient was fit for surgery. After taking fitness and consent, patient was posted for exploratory SOS staging laparotomy. On operative procedure, abdomen was opened with midline vertical incision, and ovarian mass of approximately 25 into 20 was visualized. And, from that, 10 ml of fluid was taken in the syringe, and it was sent for culture and sensitivity. And as the mass was multiloculated, it was completely drained out by suctioning, and approximately 15 liters of fluid was drained out. Then ovarian pedicle identified transfixed cut, and ovarian mass was removed out and sent for HPR. Other ovary we could not visualize, it was not found. And partial augmentectomy was also done and was sent for HPR. Her post-operative period was unremarkable. Oral feeding and ambulation were started 12 hours after surgery, and she was discharged on 5th post-operative day in good condition. This was the ovarian mass removed. This was a complete mass, and the team who operated the case and this was a bucket of dustbin which was filled with 3 liters of fluid. Then HPR report shows this was seromucinous cyst adenoma of benign origin. So patient was called for follow-up after 3 months, but she came after 1 year, and she was comfortable without any signs and symptoms of malignancy or any lymphadenopathy was not detected. So no any other intervention was needed for her. So epithelial ovarian tumors are most common tumors, and in post-hysterectomy patient, this can account for 5 to 8% of the cases. And chances of mucinous cyst adenoma to convert in malignancy is 8 to 45% in postmenopausal women. Thank you. Thank you.
What is the message that you will give?
In post-hysterectomy also the differential diagnosis, that mass can be benign. We consider it can be malignant because considering her age, she is having risk factors like nulli gravida and she was infertile patient. So there was risk factors for having ovarian tumor. So
when you are counseling the patient for hysterectomy and retaining the ovaries, especially if they are young, you tell them something that they should be coming for a follow-up.
Sorry, will you repeat that?
I wanted to know from her what is the message that, if you are doing a hysterectomy and leaving behind the ovaries. So in that case, what message you will give to that lady? Like, what kind of a counseling you will offer her?
that she can again have ovarian tumors, maybe benign or malignant, because of unopposed estrogen action. She can develop ovarian tumors.
So she needs to be
she needs follow-up. She needs follow-up.
Did she have any follow-up at all in the perimenopausal age or maybe after? How do you know that she was a postmenopausal? You have removed her uterus, right?
Yes, yes. She was outside operated now.
She was operated
outside, and she came with the mask directly to
At what age was she operated?
She was operated 44 years of age.
So you have brought a very important issue as to preventive oncology. When we are operating a patient for benign uterine disease, okay, at what age we should be considering bilateral salpingo-oophorectomy? No, you have to answer this question. Your opinion.
Yes, normally if the patient is perimenopausal and if her ovaries are normal on ultrasound, because how will you know that the ovaries are normal? We are going by the criteria of the ultrasound, that's one thing. And secondly, we have to take a thorough history. Like if there is any family history of any kind of ovarian cancer or maybe ECA, breast or severe endometrium or whatever. So if in 2 generations it is not there, then there is no need to remove the ovaries, because we know that ovaries can function, and practically even if you see the atrophic ovaries on the ultrasound, still they will be functioning for some time, which will give you a cardio protection as well as bones and genitourinary atrophy. So all these kind of a protection is offered by the ovaries. So I think there is no need to scare them that you will have a cancer, but at the same time evidence-based you can give them a percentage that occasionally you can land up with such situation. That's why we will advocate that you should be coming for a follow-up, at least maybe once in a 5 years. Or if you notice any symptoms.
5 to 8%, no? You said the chances are 5 to 8%?
5 to 48%.
5 to?
48.
48?
Total, which was given.
48 is a bit
too big.
Too high.
But you had written over there 5 to 8% is likely to have.
And that patient is not having ascites. That patient is not having ascites, and at the same time the patient is treated for infertility.
Ascites is not what we were talking. What is the incidence of having ovarian malignancy in patients who have undergone hysterectomy earlier? So she has somewhere 5 to 8%.
5 to 8%.
48 the range खूप जा range. 5 to 8 ही ले लेते हैं. 5 to 8% ले लेना.
त्यातले 60% will be ovarian serous.
Madam, please.
45, right? And when did she come? 44. And when did she come after the 54 years? Or 10 years? 10 years.
एकदा हिस्टेक्टॉमी झाली की पेशंट काही फॉलोअपला येत नाही, ते पेपर्स पण दाखवले नाही, त्याचं डिस्चार्ज कार्ड पण नाही. आणि आज सरांच्या इथनं आली होती अश्विनी मेडिकल कॉलेजपासून विथ USG रिपोर्ट. दुसरी गोष्ट म्हणजे पेशंटची रिअल स्टोरी म्हणजे पेशंटला वाटलं की आपल्याला मॅलिग्नन्सी आहे आणि खरंच मला फार वाईट वाटलं की तिचे मिस्टर आणि ती दोघंच होते. त्यांनी मला एवढंच विचारलं की ही वाचू शकते का नाही मॅडम, तुम्हाला सगळं बघायचं आहे. आणि आम्हाला वाटलं होतं की सपोज मॅलिग्नन्सी कम व्हॉट थिंग्स विल हॅपन टू दॅट पार्टनर. But fortunately that patient has benign malignant tumor, benign tumor, and they both are coming and they offered me for our all residents की आम्ही चांगल्या पद्धतीने बरे झालो आणि 5व्या दिवशी घरी गेलो. आणि ती एकटी पेशंट आणि तिचे मिस्टर असायचे खोलीमध्ये. तर मेसेज असा आहे की प्रत्येक गोष्ट काही निगेटिव्ह असू शकत नाही. देवानी त्यांना इन्फर्टिलिटी दिली, एकटेपणा दिला, तरी हा डिसीज असा दिला की ती बरी झाली.
Culture was sent, you mentioned.
ती कल्चर नाही, दॅट इज सेंट फॉर द सायटॉलॉजी फॉर मॅलिग्नन्सी. Epidectomy was done, partial omentectomy. HBR report was negative for malignancy and whole abdomen is normal. Dr. Ubale sir operated along with me and he said that it might be the benign tumor. Thank you.
This patient undergone subtotal hysterectomy.
तिने तसं लिहिलंय सर, पण तिला काही सर्विक्स दिसलेलं नाहीये आणि वजायला वॉज ॲट्रोपिक चेंजेस. तुम्ही ते विचारणार मला वाटलंच होतं.
Since Dr. Fahim is here, Dr. Parag is here, what is your take on prophylactic oophorectomy?
Good evening everyone. The indications for prophylactic the only indication for prophylactic oophorectomy is basically if they are BRCA1 or BRCA2 positive. Otherwise, prophylactic oophorectomy there is no indication. BRCA1, BRCA2 gene mutations, if they are present, then only we can think of prophylactic oophorectomy.
Same question that I asked madam. That's 44-year-old lady undergoing hysterectomy for fibroid uterus. Would you recommend removing the ovaries?
No, definitely not.
Raju? Sir.
And people are removing only one ovary. What is the logic in that?
Exactly. In this case,
Hello.
other ovary was not there. Not there. So what they have to remove one.
Please search for that ovary.
Fahim,
No, that.
I have a question for you. No, I mean, he said that at 45, no. What if it is 46? So, what I want to say is there is no role for a routine oophorectomy each and every place. Even in postmenopausal, it is
Correct, sir. Yes.
Yeah. Now, there is one suggestion from my side to all the residents who are presenting the cases and to their teachers also. Say, patient was conscious, patient's height. These are, I mean, are they significant? Patient is conscious and all that while presenting the case. That is why I said even the teachers, they need not, I mean, make them enumerate all those things.
They are postgraduates.
माहिती आहे ना, postgraduate आहे, पण बेसिकली ज्या इम्पॉर्टंट गोष्टी आहेत त्या सांगायला पाहिजे आणि त्या राहतात.
I fully agree.
आणि मग त्या कुटीमध्ये सर्व्हिस वॉज ॲट्रोफिक जे आलं ना मला ते त्याच्यामुळे आलेलं आहे.
What you are saying is right. Now,
The suggestion is to the teachers. Yeah, that's the point which was raised by Rohini madam, that some people remove only one ovary. Okay, so yeah.
Suppose on the operating table you find that one ovary is 60, the member resistance is it?
If you feel that the cystic and all, you cannot take a decision of removing the ovaries because sometimes it could be wrong. Unless there was a substantial evidence.
I have heard one of the debates regarding whether to remove ovaries during hysterectomy or not. And the medical legal opinion was that if you are doing hysterectomy, you have to explain the patient that you are going to remove her gonads if you are going to touch the ovaries. So that's a separate consent for adnexectomy and separate consent for hysterectomy. Two cannot be clubbed together.
आउट ऑफ फक्त एक सांगतोय ह्या गोष्टीवर जर आपण डिस्कशन करतोय याच्यावर एक चांगलं पुस्तक आहे हेनरी डेक्करचं द एरर ऑफ जजमेंट. मला वाटतं पोस्ट ग्रॅज्युएशन सगळ्यांनी वाचायला पाहिजे ते पुस्तक.
डॉक्टर मला एक गोष्ट विचारायची. सपोजिंग वन पेशंट इज हॅविंग डर्माटोसिस. सपोज patient is having side. Another ovary appears to be fine on ultrasound transvaginal. You can see the ovary texture very good, absolutely small follicles and everything. And uterus is absolutely normal. So what you would suggest? Remove only the dermoid ovary or another ovary? Patient is very young, 32 or 34, but completed the option.
Only the involved diseased ovary, not the normal ovary. Only cyst also we can, dermoid cyst also we can access, preserving the ovarian tissue.
Dr. Fahim, I want to ask you a question.
Fahim, here is the question for you.
Yes, ma'am. Sorry.
We have a sir.
Are you listening, Fahim?
Yes, sir.
This is for you.
So there is a patient of ovarian cyst, it might be serious nuisance, whatever. We take out the tumor and then the HPR turns out to be borderline. Then what would you suggest?
First suggestion is confirm the pathology with a review of slides and blogs with a good pathologist. If needed, immunohistochemistry to confirm the diagnosis. If it is a borderline with a low mitotic figures, then we can do close follow-up. There is no need to go in again and do further surgery. But if it is highly malignant potential, then we can think of doing restaging and going ahead with further treatment depending upon the further findings.
This close follow-up is?
Basically sonography every 3 months. CT scan, there is no need to do a CT scan, but I think sonography is sufficient. Along with CA-125, there is no role for in borderline malignancy.
So only ultrasound?
Only ultrasound. If you are not comfortable, if you are having suspicion in ultrasound, you can do a good quality CT scan.
How long? 3 monthly ultrasound?
Ultrasound 3 monthly for 2 years.
2 years.
2 years.
I faintly remember as a recent when I had presented a case of borderline ovarian tumor. The literature then which we read, okay, said that for young patients where this is a unilateral borderline ovarian tumor, you already removed the ovary, that's why you have histopathology with you. Ask her to complete her family at earliest and then go ahead with the definitive treatment.
Correct, sir. Agreed. We have a doctor here in Solapur actually. She had borderline malignancy. She got only oophorectomy of that side. Again, she had pregnancy and later on we completed the surgery after 3-4 years.
Thank you.
Borderline tumors, as I said, by definition they do not have any basement in vision. So they are by definition non-metastatic. So we have to look for fertility preserving options in these cases. That is the big term.
Any more questions from the oncologist here?
There are 2 more cases.
2 more cases, okay. You still will have more questions coming up with 2 more cases.
Borderline tumors are always a gray area. And thank you for your inputs, sir. We will come into the last 2 cases. I would like to invite Dr. Raksha Gaikar. She is junior resident from Department of Ashwini Rural Medical College. She has done her MBBS from the Kolhapur and cleared now MRCOG Part 1. Over to you, Dr. Raksha.
Good evening, teachers, senior members of society, and my dear friends. Myself, Dr. Raksha Gaikar, OBGY resident, would like to present a case of steroids and tumor, not otherwise specified, moderated under Dr. Sudeep Sambaram, Assistant Professor, ARMCH OBGY Department. A 32-year-old, para 3, living 3, abortion 1, with all full-term normal deliveries and tubectomized, presented with amenorrhea since 5 years, weight gain, acne, excessive growth of coarse hair and hoarseness of voice since 3.5 years, pain in abdomen since 1 month. There was no any history of fever and vomiting, galactorrhea, weight gain, cold intolerance, no history of bowel or bladder complaints or any prolonged drug intake. She was in her 12 years of non-consanguineous marriage. Her last childbirth was 7 years back. She was amenorrheic since 5 years. Her menstrual cycles 5 years ago were regular. She had taken treatment for amenorrhea for 4 to 6 months, but her symptoms continued. No any other medical or surgical comorbidity present. No significant family history or personal history could be elicited. On examination, her BMI was 27.3. On general examination, acanthosis nigricans was present over nape of neck, acne, coarse facial hair, villous hair over thigh, abdomen and arms were present. Her Ferriman-Galway score was 22/36. Here is the picture of the patient depicting coarse hair over chin, upper lip and cheek. There was no pallor or lymphadenopathy. Her breast and thigh.
Next.
On local examination of external genitalia, clitoris was hypertrophied. On per-speculum examination, cervix was hypertrophied. On bimanual examination, left fornicial fullness was present, no tenderness present. So my provisional diagnosis was 32 years old, para 3, living 3, abortion 1, with left adnexal mass with signs of hyperandrogenism under evaluation. USG revealed a well-defined, homogeneous, hyperechoic, solid, large mass of 7.2 into 6.6 cm, most likely arising from left ovary. Lesion was highly vascular and well encapsulated, showed no septae or papillary excrescences, suggestive of benign left ovarian mass lesion. Her RMI was 16.5. Here are the USG images. MRI suggested an hyperintense enhancing solid lesion in left adnexa, likely to be left ovarian neoplasm. In view of history of viralization, possibility of Sertoli Ledicel tumor was considered. Hormonal profiling was done of the patient. Her serum testosterone was markedly elevated. Rest of her hormonal profile was normal. Tumor markers was done. CA125, alpha-fetoprotein and lactate dehydrogenase were within normal limits. A staging laparotomy was done with wide vertical incision to evaluate left ovarian mass. Intraoperatively, peritoneal fluid was sent for cytology. No malignant cells were revealed. Contralateral, that is right ovary biopsy, was taken for frozen section, which revealed no malignancy. Dr. Guliwale sir's opinion was taken and total abdominal hysterectomy with bilateral salpingectomy with left oophorectomy with preservation of right ovary was done. Omental biopsy was sent. Pelvic and para-aortic nodes were examined. Here is the picture showing specimen of uterus with cervix with bilateral fallopian tubes and left ovarian mass. The external surface appears grey-white and globular. Cut surface shows homogeneous, golden brown and soft in consistency. Histological slide revealed well-defined encapsulated lesion. Lobules of tumor cells were separated by thin fibrous septate. Cells were multivaculated. Nuclei were centrally placed with minimal nuclear eutypia. No evidence of increased mitosis or hyperchromasia, necrosis or hemorrhage seen. Histopathological report confirmed it to be benign left ovarian mass, steroid cell tumor not otherwise specified. Further substantiating the diagnosis, immunohistochemistry was done in which inhibin, androgen receptors and calretinin were positive. We followed up the patient. On post-op day 15, her serum testosterone had drastically decreased. Post-operative 3 months later, hoarseness of voice, villous hair over thigh, abdomen and arms was decreased. Now let's have a little discussion on ovarian tumors. Based on anatomic structures from which tumors originate, there are 3 types: surface epithelium, sex cord stroma and germ cells. Further, sex cord stromal tumors are classified into pure stromal tumor, pure sex cord tumor and mixed sex cord stromal. So steroid cell tumor belongs to pure stromal tumors. Steroid cell is further histologically classified into stromal luteoma, Leydig cell tumor and steroid cell tumor not otherwise specified. Steroid cell tumor not otherwise specified is predominantly seen in reproductive age group. The cell lineage is unknown and predominant hormone is testosterone. Here is a flow chart concising the same. Some salient features. The clinical features are largely dependent on hormone production, typically testosterone secreting. Estrogen and cortisol production is also seen. The viralizing properties of the tumor account for 56 to 77% of patients. 1/3 of steroid cell tumor are clinically malignant with poor prognosis. Signs and symptoms of androgenic tumors occurs in 2 definite phases. Early phase of defeminization followed by phase of masculinization. The sensitivity of immunohistochemical markers, inhibin is 50 to 90% and calretinin is 60 to 90%, further supporting our diagnosis. Let's come to the treatment part. Laparoscopic staging is recommended. Treatment depends mainly on future fertility. So if it is a benign lesion, we go for unilateral laparoscopic oophorectomy. If malignant and unilateral, we go for unilateral salpingo-oophorectomy. If bilateral or family is complete, we go for total abdominal hysterectomy with bilateral salpingo-oophorectomy. If wide metastasis diagnosis is done, surgical cytoreduction is done, followed by adjuvant chemotherapy of bleomycin, etoposide and cisplatin. In recurrent malignancies, GnRH agonist can be used. So I conclude by saying that our case emphasizes on prompt surgical management as it has shown to normalize excess testosterone level within 15 days of surgery and gradual decrease of viralizing characters. Any patient with viralism should be investigated to determine the source of raised testosterone, whether adrenal or ovarian. Treatment modalities should be individualized based on tumor histology, surgical staging and desire for preservation of fertility. These are my references. Thank you all for patience.
We will take questions after the second case.
Junior resident at Department of OBGYN at Ashwini Rural Medical College. She is presenting case of mixed germ cell tumor. Over to you, Dr. Ankita.
Good evening. Good evening, respected teachers, senior members of the society, and my dear friends. Myself, Dr. Ankita Chatak, OBGYN resident from ARMCH Kundhari. I am presenting this case under the guidance of Dr. Goliwale sir. My case is of mixed germ cell tumor. 16-year unmarried girl came in OPD with complaint of fullness of abdomen since 2 months, which was increasing, complaint of pain in abdomen over right hypochondriac region since 1 month, which was aggravating on food intake, prolonged sitting and relieves on rest. complaints of constipation since 1.5 months, and complaints of backache since 4 to 5 days, complaints of cold, fever with chills since 2 days, no history of bladder complaint. She attained menarche at the age of 13 and her menstrual cycle were regular. There were no any other comorbidities. On examination, general condition was moderate, patient was vitally stable, her BMI was 20.34 kg per meter square, pallor was present and no lymphadenopathy was seen. Systemic examination was within normal limit. On per abdominal examination, inspection, symmetrical distension of abdomen was present, veins were dilated, stria was seen over the abdomen moves with respiration, umbilicus was inverted and no scars or sinuses were seen. On palpation, large mass of approximately 34 weeks size of gravid uterus extending up to xiphisternum was seen. Dimensions was about 25 into 30 into 20 centimeters, solid in consistency with irregular borders, mass moves with respiration, lower border not felt separately, side to side mobility was absent. No shifting dullness was noted. On auscultation, vowel sounds were present and no murmur felt over the mass. USG finding was suggestive of solid cystic mixed echogenicity focal mass lesion with irregular shape involving both iliac fossa. Measures about 35 into 38 into 29 cm in dimension. Cystic component shows internal echoes and septae within. No evidence of ascites was noted. No Doppler findings were mentioned and RMI score was 570. On CT scan, large inhomogeneously enhancing hypodense solid cystic mass lesion occupying entire abdominal cavity with epicenter in the left iliac fossa with area of non-enhancing necrosis was seen. Uterus appears normal in size and anteverted. Cystic lesion in right ovary about 4 into 3 cm was noted. Findings were suggestive of neoplastic mass, possibility of left tubo-ovarian origin. Lab investigation, major investigations were within normal limit. We have done her serum markers which was markedly raised. On correlating the imaging and lab finding, diagnosis of malignant ovarian germ cell tumor was made. Along with the consultation with oncosurgeon, plan for surgical intervention was done, that is staging laparotomy, as it is essential for the definitive tissue diagnosis, staging and treatment. The procedure was done under epidural anesthesia. Findings were ascitic fluid was sent for cytology and malignant cells were seen. A mass of about 30 into 30 cm arising from left-sided fallopian tube and left ovary was seen. Hence, left-sided salpingo-oophorectomy was done. A cystic lesion of about 3 by 3 cm was present on the right ovary, which was excised along with its capsule, which comes out to be benign on frozen section. Hence, right ovary preservation was done and pelvic lymph node dissection was done along with omental dissection. This was the mass. On histopathological report, mixed germ cell tumor diagnosis was given. It was anaplastic dysgerminoma with yolk sac tumor. For further management, we referred patient to cancer center and she has undergone 3 cycles of chemotherapy till now. We'll discuss about germ cell malignancy. Germ cell tumor derived from primordial germ cell of the ovary. Malignant germ cell tumor can arise in extragonadal sites such as mediastinum, retroperitoneum. Most germ cell tumor arises in gonads from undifferentiated germ cells. Mixed germ cell tumor comes in the category of primitive germ cell tumor. This is the further classification of primordial germ cell tumors. Germ cell tumor grow rapidly and commonly present with acute and subacute pelvic pain related to capsular distension, hemorrhage or necrosis. Rapidly enlarging pelvic mass may produce pressure symptoms on the bladder or rectum and menstrual irregularities were seen. Some patients of germ cell tumor will be premenarcheal and may require examination under anesthesia. If the lesions are principally solid or a combination of solid and cystic, as might be noted on ultrasonographic evaluation, a neoplasm is probable and a malignancy is possible. During physical examination, search for the signs of ascites, pleural effusion and organomegaly. Diagnosis can be made at adnexal masses measuring 2 cm or larger in premenarcheal girls or 8 cm or larger in premenopausal patients usually require surgical exploration. For young patients, blood investigation should be done such as serum HCG, AFP and LDH. CT scan of chest is important because germ cell tumor can metastasize to lungs or mediastinum. CT scan can also help us to know the extent of tumor or retroperitoneal lymphadenopathy or liver metastasis. Karyotype should be obtained preoperatively for all premenarcheal girls, particularly those with dysgerminoma, because they may arise in dysgenetic gonads. We'll discuss something about mixed germ cell tumors. Mixed germ cell malignancy of ovary contain two or more elements of the lesion. The most common component of mixed germ cell malignancy is dysgerminoma, constituted about 80%, endodermal sinus tumor 70%, immature teratomas 53%, choriocarcinoma 20%, and embryonical carcinoma 16%. Most frequent combination is seen, that is dysgerminoma and endodermal sinus tumor. Mixed germ cell tumor may secrete AFPs and HCG. Treatment is fertility sparing surgery, that is unilateral salpingo-oophorectomy, is performed in all reproductive age group women diagnosed with malignant ovarian germ cell tumor. Advanced disease and histological type of malignant ovarian germ cell tumor have been treated with combination chemotherapy after surgery. The standard regimen is 5-day course of bleomycin, etoposide and cisplatin given every 3 weekly. Patients with malignant ovarian germ cell tumor are followed by careful clinical, radiological and serological surveillance every 3 monthly for the first 2 years after therapy completion, because 99% of reoccurrence develop within this time frame. Malignant ovarian germ cell tumor have an excellent overall prognosis. These are my references. Thank you for patient listening.
You said about taking out that ovarian tumor and preserving the other ovarian portion, right? So what would you do after removing it? Could you do some kind of a fertility preservation by doing cryopreservation of these ovaries? Or oocytes, can you do that? Yeah, before the radiation, this radiation or whatever chemo you want to give. Because nowadays that concept is there, that you remove that ovary, you know that it is that is malignant, and before you give chemotherapy, you should remove the oocytes. Cryopreserve.
Yeah. Well done.
What is your opinion? So 16 years old.
Younger age, better. Younger age group, we should go for a cryopreservation. Just by doing one side is unilateral oophorectomy, and the other side also before giving radiotherapy chemotherapy, we should go for a cryopreservation of the oocytes, and sometimes we also plicate the ovaries in a higher level so that the radiotherapy doesn't affect them.
I think cryopreservation in very early age, I don't know whether how much is the results of cryopreservation. Basically, nowadays some gynecologists, I think they are not that keen for younger females for ovulation induction and then cryopreservation. Because I don't know. I just want to ask.
No, even these immature oocytes can be matured in vitro.
Okay, immature, yeah.
They can be
No,
matured.
routinely we are doing cryopreservation, but the quality of that ova or fertility.
That's true. Cryopreservation always destroys 30% of the tissue. Okay. But at least what? Rather than giving her no chance, you can give her some chance.
Yeah, consent we have taken.
Just not related to ovarian malignancy, but because you raised the issue, I wanted to bring this to the notice of all young gynecologists, because I somehow learned that the new generation is followers of Bollywood. Okay, so they once upon a sometimes the news flashes that this actress has cryopreserved oocytes, and then for next 20 years she was in the profession, and then she thought of having a baby. That's not a true story actually, to be very honest. Okay, the oocytes, they degenerate on cryopreservation also. So those of you who have some funny ideas in your mind about postponing your marriage, please do not do so, and do not think of cryopreserving oocytes. That's the important message that I wanted to give. Thank you very much.
तसं नाही, राजूजी म्हणाला ना की लवकर लग्न करावं, म्हणलं ना आम्ही एक ब्रांच काढणार आहे मॅरेज ब्युरोची, त्याचं हे ॲडव्हर्टाइजमेंट आहे. My question is to the previous speaker. See, she was suffering from this androgenic symptoms for almost 5 years, you said.
Yes, amenorrhea for 5 years.
Amenorrhea for 5 years. So, was there any previous treatment or consultation by any dermatologist or gynecologist?
She had just taken OC pills continuously for 4 to 6 months.
On recommendation of?
Some private practice.
So, private or government, it doesn't matter. Gynaec or dermatologist.
She was more concerned about her amenorrhea. So she just had. She was
Yeah, but I'm surprised that nobody suspected 5 years amenorrhea, virilizing symptoms, and still in 5 years nobody had suspected. Very sorry to know that. Anyway, your presentation was extremely good.
Thank you, sir.
After this exhaustive clinical discussion, it's time to felicitate all our teachers and students who made this discussion possible. So I request our President Dr. Dhate Madam to felicitate Dr. Dabde sir.
What for?
What for? I don't know.
सरांनी जास्त प्रश्न विचारू नये म्हणून तिने पहिल्यांदा.
Dr. Tirandkar Madam. Dr. Guruvara. Dr. Parag.
Oh, madam, the board you the photo.
Dr. Sudeep Sambare.
Sudeep.
Let us felicitate all the students who presented cases. Dr. Raksha Gaikar. Dr. Ankita Chatak. Dr. Ashwini Jadhav. Dr. Kranti Dikle. Dr. Prachi Jain. Dr. Anusha Shetty.
Dr. Amruta Kumtekar.
I request everyone to come to stage for a photograph, group photograph.
There is one announcement. Tomorrow, along with the AMOX, there is one webinar, but it is live session at Sandesh Kade Hospital, Sunrise Hospital. Vijay will put the link at the night after completing this session, and tomorrow morning, 11 AM onwards, the session will start. They will do 6 cases of endometriosis. and everything about endometriosis. That is what are ultrasonographical findings, what are MRI findings, and the faculties are Sandesh Kade, second is another Kade gynecologist, Vijay Pawar sir, Magdoon is there, radiologist, neurosurgeon Krishna sir is there, and Vijay, you will tell. As this activity is going on, we are not putting it on our groups because there is lot of confusion whether to come for clinical meeting or go there. And there are less terms, so Lalita was all the time in tension, madam. 4च thumb वाले, 5च thumb वाले.
Don't worry, the thumb will come there.
No, the people will come. There are so many teachers here, so many senior consultants are there. They give input to every cases. In this year, I want the CME, clinical meeting on specific topics. Today we discuss with ovary. In next CME, I put on the board, that is, we will discuss about the cases of PID or ectopic, so that we will have the discussion with the teachers and student also update with the knowledge of academics of the ovary and all this. So that tomorrow is very good session for endometriosis. You can learn everything about endometriosis and there is no fees to link for. And we have no efforts to arrange food for. Today, I am thankful to all of you that you have come, and mainly I am thankful to all PG students that this is the stage. They present the cases and Sardar madam will guide so that they will get the prize in conference. Thank you so much.
I request Dr. Ghate madam to felicitate Dr. Meena Chitgurkar.
रिझर्व मध्ये गेली.
The topic was slightly different, so the felicitation is also separate. So
because of Meenal, we are getting food free from the so thank you for Meenal. Please come on the dais, teachers. We'll take group photo. Madam, please come. Sardesai madam, Dhamre madam, Puram sir, Puram madam. They will take photograph, you sit, and then you have food, soup along with it. Okay. After photo, you can take food. उशीर झाला तरी पाहुणे